going to proceed with the next session. So, we are deepening in the question of informing research, and now this session is on quantitative and qualitative methods for profiling rights and needs at community level and informing protection programming. And for this presentation, we have Francesco Michele. Michele. Francesco has a degree by the University of Perugia and Masters in International Relations and in Humanitarian Action. He has 12 years of experience in the management and evaluation of humanitarian and development programs in Central America and the Middle East. Francesco has specialized in combining human rights and needs approaches to reinforce the capabilities of communities for engaging in self-protection activities that complement humanitarian actors' interventions. He is now the head, the humanitarian and protection policy expert of the Italian NGO GBC, and leads a task force to do research and integrated protection. And one of his tasks is the coordination and implementation of a model of community protection approach implemented in several consortium in the Middle East. So thank you very much, Francesco, for accepting our invitation and for being here. And you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and for having the passion and the patience to listen to me for the next 40 minutes. I will try to not to be boring. It's funny how you sound important when you read the bio and then it's like anyway. Well, good morning. I hope you are still a bit awake. I will try to be active. Today, well, thank you very much for the invitation. For me specifically, it's a big honor to present this type of exercise because, and I start by saying this, it's field experience. So that after we try to approach it from a research point of view, but the results that I'm presenting today of the methodology that we design have been tested, worked out, and developed from the field. So it's a pity that my local colleagues from the different missions where we work are not here to present because probably they would be much more interested than me in explaining things. But I will try to make value of their work because it was what we have today is really, really thanks to them. Then we had research, we had some thinking, but the field testing was for us the key of everything. So just to accompany you a bit in my presentation, I will try to give you a quick snapshot of how the methodology is about, how the method is about, then delve a bit better in the process of analysis that we undertake, combining quantitative and qualitative information, and then I will try to go a bit on the exercise we try to do to try to find a way to measure safety and dignity. I already tell you from now that I will raise more doubts and questions than answers. So, and I really hope you start with a very, very critical mind. So, and then you really attack at the end because that's the only way of learning and keep improving. So, with no further ado, so our approach is called community protection approach. There is no community-based because it tries automatically to take the distances from normal community-based approach that generally try to create substructures in the community, and which is not our goal. Our goal is to have an instrument to do community engagement, an instrument to have a protection analysis of the environment, but the main goal is to do community engagement towards a specific elements, which is having instruments to design integrated protection programming. Even though I think that many of you are aware, using an existing definition, integrated protection programming is the use of multi-sector action, multi-stakeholder and multi-level to address a protection issue. Here I took a definition from an organization called Interaction, and it speaks about multi-sectorial humanitarian response activity. I would say that it's not just humanitarian, it's humanitarian, developmental, institution building. The combination of different action towards a specific protection objective. In our case, the approach, it doesn't delve into one specific protection issues, an individual or a community level, but it tries to have a system of analysis of the environment. So try to get a grasp of all the causal factors and consequences of the risk and consequences of violence, coercion, deliberate deprivation, and abuse, which are the main 4 elements of risks. How do we try to do that? We apply the protection risk equation. I don't know if you are familiar with the protection risk equation. I think from this corner, yes.
Yeah.
But from that side, have you ever heard about or you ever seen the protection risk equation?
Yes.
Yeah? Just to be interactive, someone can explain it to me? Come on, don't be shy. Yeah.
Well, the risk is, whenever there's a risk, there's always going to be a vulnerability from one specific community, and then the threat, which is coming from the risk as well, and it's all going to be
Balanced?
balanced by the specific capacities of one community, and that all makes the risk, the level of risk that that community has.
Perfect. You explained better than I could do. The good things that I will maybe use for the question after is if the capacity is within the community, or what is capacity, which raised the question for me on how we try to measure the qualitative part. I mean, there are elements of vulnerability, threats, and capacity. There are at different levels, multi-levels. So one of the big questions that we have to start using and then maintain for after is how do we define them? It's community level, individual, it's outside the community, it's the interaction between the external and internal part of the community, but this is for later. So we apply a protection risk equation to try to have an analysis of the coercive environment. And what we try to do in design the methodology is to have specific outputs that can be used for different, in light of the objective the methodology has. From one side, we come out with a protection response plan, so a multi-sectorial plan, multi-level, multi-stakeholder, and from short to long term, with a community profiling that are outputs that are given to communities and are also used in parallel with different actors, as I will explain after. Then what it tries to do is to maintain or establish a system of monitoring of the environment that is localized, so that it can be maintained at local level. And in this, being a community protection approach, at the very, very beginning when we started was very community oriented. But one of the big questions was, what do we do when we come across individual cases? So we worked it out to try to have a system in order to identify the most vulnerable, or let's say the identification of families and individuals at risk. Not to intervene ourselves, but at least to have a picture of it. And again, from the way we try to design the output is try to use the information that normally used for programming also to influence policy orientations. So the same type of evidence that we generate in the field is used for programming in the field, but also policy orientation. To make you an example, we managed, for example, in Palestine, after carrying out the implementation on 190 communities, to go as humanitarian organization to the Human Rights Council. I mean, for us was the first time as a humanitarian organization to present our data to the Human Rights Council. Normally I have two conflicting dimensions, I would say, but so this is what has been one of the goals. I wrote process of action research. This is how we started. So we started very humbly, in 2014 in the field. I was in charge of the operations, and our question was very simple. GVC is a pure project-based organization. We have humanitarian and developmental project. But what was happening is that we would be in an area for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but year after year changing, or not changing year after year, but each once in a while changing the type of project. So we would target, like you now, with a wash activity for 2 years, then we would have a shelter intervention, and then we would go to a developmental intervention, changing sectors. So we were asking ourselves, what can we have, what type of instruments can we have to, even though we change the projects, maintain a constant process of analysis to understand the changes in the environment, in terms of the overall environment. And also inform our different programming to have complementarity. So we did our pilot, and then the methodology has been used, and is still being used by a consortium of different organizations that now is targeting 50,000 people with different mandates. So we have an organization with legal mandate, another organization that is responding to services, but we try all to use the same analysis. As you see, we moved to Lebanon, to the Syrian crisis. We tested again by ourselves, and now it's used for a consortium that is starting this year and is targeting around 217,000 people in what they're calling informal tented settlement. So all the Syrian refugees that are in tents in rural or semi-urban area. So this is the practice part. So when we did all the practice part, during 3-4 years, we collected a lot of evidences, but we sincerely didn't know very well what to do with the evidences, because as an organization, we didn't have the expertise to know how to study and research. So there was an effort to establish a research department that we started in January to now do a different type of work that I think is going to open for the last session, which is try to do a bit actual research. So the system of analysis involves community in the self-analysis. This is used for our programming, and then with the research department we try to learn from the actual application. And the idea is from now until 2019, which is what we managed to have sustainable at the moment, we will keep doing this exercise. So what I'm presenting today is a mostly structured methodology, but it keeps evolving, which I think is one of the key elements that we have to maintain in our discussion. That should be the nature of our tools. The application of a systematic tools over and over and over, you should learn from the experience. What are the objectives? It's an instrument to inform integrated protection programming, but the first objective is not analysis, not response. The first objective, formulated in other terms, is to try to increase the agency of the population. So to try to do non-empowerment in a broad sense, but try to support communities and individuals to make informed decision. Informed decision about their life, so local protection strategies, or prevent risk or harm, or responding to needs. So it's not to provide solution, but to try to support individuals or accompany individuals and community to make their own informed decision. We, in our initial discussion and internally, when we tried to discuss this, we also saw that community cannot be left alone. It's not just that you do empowerment, you support them or people, individuals, to make informed decisions, and then you leave them alone and they're capable. There is a continuous need of support, specifically in many contexts, complex crises or other contexts. So our second objectives, this is more related to the way we design the outputs, and the way we use the outputs is to facilitate the complementarity and the coordination of different actors. So it requires the analyses are not for us only, but also we try to design in a way that are in platforms and they are available to different stakeholders. In Palestine at the moment, we are at the 4th year, and the analysis is used by eco partners, humanitarian community, cluster coordinator, local municipalities, and developmental donors. So there is the same plan, the same type of analysis, and the idea is that the integrated protection programming stems not from a program itself, but from all actors just using the same type of analysis and information on the same strategy. How does it work? This is related to a challenge to be an organization in the field that is project-based. So we are the project cycle, if you know, or you will learn, are depending on the type of project you have, are 10 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 and 36 months. So what we tried to do, our effort was, how can we have a cyclical process of empowerment, analysis, and self-analysis with the community that can go in parallel with our project, and then the activities in the field, the feasibility of the activity to maintain this analysis, we can embed them in our project. So we have our engineer going and collecting GPS data and other information, because they have to do that for the project. How can we add or steps or activity that can help us out maintaining the cyclical analysis? The process is, it's in itself is a bit, what Nora was saying yesterday, it's not rocket science. It's define the risks, understanding the needs associated to those risks, the coping strategy and the consequences, using that analysis to elaborate plans, short to long term, and then making those plans, making the community very well aware on how to use those plans and putting them at the center of the different actors that are intervening in support. So humanitarian, developmental, and institutional intervention are taking place, and then the localized system of monitoring monitors the environment. So it doesn't monitor specific project or specific intervention. It's a sort of outcome analysis that serves the idea of measuring changes. And then when the analysis those changes, try to trickle down, I mean every single actor then can do his analysis internally, what were possible elements of causality, attribution, or contribution. Which means basically if I had a WASH project in an area, or if I had a legal program, looking at the variation of the environment, try to infer or do analysis and understand what contributed and what external aspects contributed to it. Now we go a bit in how does it work, the cycle. So the community, the approach as we designed, in the original design it was not 3 phases. It was not structure. It was a series of activities that we were doing, just to see how we then arrived to synthesizing. We started from a methodology well known, which is the one of Action Aid. It's called Safety with Dignity. We try to apply it ourselves, some of the tools, and then from there we synthesize, and we arrive to this design. So we have a first phase, which is what we call assessment and context profiling, that goes in parallel with a protection analysis. After the protection analysis, there is the elaboration of the analysis and the plan. There is this is all actors are informed, activity take place, and then we have the monitoring that is contextualized to every areas. Depends on project cycle needs or droughts or seasonal problems. So then the system of monitoring, the timing of the monitoring, we try to pace it depending on the context. The cycle works in this way. The first step, the first phase, is done and carried out only the first time we target an area. So the first time we target an area, we do the first phase, with the idea of then the second and the third phase being able to replicate them on yearly basis. Why the first phase is, it's because the first phase is time consuming. The first phase is where we want to understand the context, and we try to understand the context. So what we try to learn from our mistakes, and sometimes we were convinced that by engaging the community, they would be happy to be engaged. Okay, I mean, this is an assumption that sometimes we take, or by knowing the community because we've been there for 10 years, they will be happy to participate in focus group and telling us our problem. In reality, what we analyzed after many testing is that the first step for us is not to enter and collect the data. We enter and collect the data, but in a very broad way based on needs. But we do, and this is the link with the social network. Here is where we do our power analysis, participation analysis. Then we sit down and we try to analyze what's happening in that community. In a specific community, you might have a leader, a cacique, or that is basically controlling, or you might have another community that they already have a very good democratic system, or you might have community where you have a Bedouin system. So it's for us to understand, and also to understand the composition of the different age, gender, and diversity groups. At this stage is where then we tailor the community engagement. So the part of community engagement really depends on every single community. So there are communities where we have a series of mixed method techniques, from focus group to interviews to observatory work with the community. Depending on the composition of the age, gender, and diversity, our very simple analysis of power dynamic compared to the social network analysis, we try to, let's say, have a do not harm approach from one side and find the best way of getting the information. So try to reduce at maximum by tailoring the second phase the elements of biases and deviation. Okay, so having information that is biased by certain actor or deviations because we suddenly just are interviewing the same type of people. And there might be just age, gender, and diversity, but maybe the people from the one family or one tribal group of the community. This gives us the context understanding, then to have the second and the first steps then we can do it in a shorter time because we already know. We have a better clue on how to get information and how to relate with the communities. As I was saying before, what happens in between the second and the third phase is that you have the overall project implementation. So you have a humanitarian project, developmental project, intervention by institution, by ministries. So this we look at in comparison with the plan. I mean, the community is engaged, and we maintain the monitoring to measure the changes. So far, so good. I know that I speak very quickly, so I'll try to. Now entering in the topic of today, what do we have at the quantitative and the qualitative side and the programming side? So in assessment, which is let's say the phase 1 and phase 2, when we do the context profiling analysis, we start with very, very simple tools. A multi-sector questionnaire. We drew questions from different aspects, from the humanitarian, from governance aspects, from developmental, and we develop a multi-sector questionnaire that is needs-based. We don't ask any protection question. It's a need-based questionnaire. And then we enter in the community consultation, and we use a mixed method approach, parallel approach, to develop the response plan according to the protection egg that I will explain a bit after. The multi-sector questionnaire is combined in indicators. So we take all the raw data, so the different type of data, we cross them, and we came out with, let's say, different proxy indicators that make use of different data to give us a more complex dimension. Okay, those indicators are structured according to the protection risk analysis. So the indicators are associated to threats, vulnerability, capacity according to the protection risk equation, and they return what we call a protection risk index per sector. So we have different type of sectors, so we have a protection risk index per each sector. Then the values are combined in an overall protection risk of the community. That again can be disaggregated in threats, vulnerability, and capacity indexes. So it means that, for example, in this we are a community, we would have a value that tells us a protection risk of our community, but then it tells us the value of how water is impacting the protection risk, shelter, the communication with the outside, the relation with external actors, in order to see more or less to have an indication of what dimension are more. This is an analyst will be screaming because I never know which word to use. It tells us who has the major effects on the protection risk. There are different terminology. No, it's not impact, it's not occurrence, it's not severity. I mean, we have a long discussion with analysts because, and sometimes we simplify, but from their side, it's not a mathematical direct connection that tells you that if wash is high, the protection risk is high, you directly can infer that wash is really impacting. Still, statistically, you cannot say that. But that for us, it's important because it's where the qualitative information comes in. So for us, the issues that the quantitative just gives a picture, for us it's enough because we have the qualitative. So what we have, we use the values that comes out from our system of indicator, then gives us an indication of which protection dimension we have to analyze, and we enter in the community engagement. So, and we do what we basically simply we were explaining yesterday and today, we analyze causes, consequences, and coping strategy. What we try to do now that we learn from our mistakes, again, is that we try to code this text that we collect. Imagine that our colleagues goes to the field, they have a discussion with you and they collect feedbacks. And all feedbacks is tests, is qualitative information. So what we try to do is to code this qualitative information against dignity and safety. So we can try to use it in a much more systematized way. We then, when we arrive at the moment of the strategy and design the plans, we use the combined approach. So the quantitative gives us an indication, and we use the qualitative to qualify that indication, to simplify. And we enter in the design of the plans that use, the protection egg, that I think you're familiar. Should I ask, they know what is a protection egg? They should know. Do you know the model of the protection egg?
They should.
That is the reason I'm asking. I was afraid not to putting them on the spot. But,
The huevo, the egg framework.
yeah, okay, let's not put them too much on the spot. There is a categorization. I have just one question. Those categorization between substitution and responsive remedial environmental building are hierarchical or non-hierarchical? That's a question I would like to have the answer. Someone? Otherwise, I point. It is non-hierarchical. No, this is for me, it's important for one specific thing. What we try to do is not then to do a plan that tells first you should do this and after you should do this, but we try to configure the action that are needed to address the environment in a way that show what they are addressing. Then the temporality of it is something that is discussed afterwards. We don't discuss the temporality here. So, and it's extremely important when you do integrated programming. Integrated programming depends on the way you want to target it and the capacity in the field. I'm speaking about field experience. So if you would have huge funds, big funds, developmental funds, for example, for the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon at this stage, we will enter from more structural activities that will address immediate problem, but also the causes of those problems. Then sometimes the limits is that you don't have those funds, you have just humanitarian funds, so then you have to prioritize according to that. But at least it's to maintain the picture. Those plans, we organize them based on sectors. This is to ensure complementarities because you know the cluster system is organized by sectors, and also on the developmental side we have different sectors. So this allows us to have the analysis communicating with a different external system. The monitoring mirrors the assessment. So is same, doesn't change. Same questionnaire and same community engagement. Of course, the time and the type of activities that we have in the community are less and are reduced, but we use the same instruments. The idea is to generate trends. So not to have what is called output monitoring. So I have, let's say, a baseline, an end line, and I finish there. But try to develop trends that are very, very useful. The more you develop trends, the more you learn from the environment. Then analyze quantitative trends. Quantitative. They are always limited. And then analyze those trends, how they are associated with changes in the life of the population. And then tracking in the same time, in the same process, the activities that has been external or internal or different actors that took place in that area. Okay? So in terms of trend, we can have several different types of trends. On single indicators, like for example, we have indicators of number of unaccompanied children, which is a typical indicators, or and we have a substitution indicator. So how much the community is supported by external actors and how much is supported by institution that will help us out in understanding substitution and duty bearer. So we can have trends on specific indicator. We can have trends at level of sectors, or we can have trends of the overall values of the risk. On the qualitative side, those coded, all those texts that we have been collecting that tells us something, is coded, and then we analyze changes in the same dimensions. Okay, so one typical example. We built a school in your community. So the quantitative indicator tells me that you have better education. Okay, so I'm simplifying. I'm coming and I'm telling you, okay, what has been changing in education for you? And oftentimes, specifically in the short time, so when you do the implementation, nothing changed. We have the same dropout. We have the same problem of, for example, boys or girls not attending schools. And this helps us out in understanding why, and why the build-up of the school didn't impact directly on education. But these are elements that you can capture, I wouldn't say only, but mainly with qualitative information. So for us it was important to keep using qualitative information to qualify what the quantitative says. And then, it's tracking the action of different actors, so duty bearers, organizations, or even the community themselves, to try to do an exercise of not inferring automatically if there is causality, attribution, contribution, or there are external factors, but to have a picture. Because one thing that for me is important is the system doesn't tell you automatically if an activity contributed to a change or contributed to indicator, but it tries to give indication by having a trend on the how specific needs has been changed on the quantitative, having a trends on understanding changes in terms of community, even their coping strategy, and in the same period in that community, in your community, this and this happen. It helps in try to understand possible attribution or external factor. The big challenge, I start posing challenges that we had, is fitting this in a humanitarian intervention. Because fitting this in humanitarian intervention, first and foremost our organization, but then our partners, it's like, oh, we are building a system of monitoring that is not measuring the outputs or the results of my activities. How come? But the issue is that is for me important is that showing how the community really changes is extremely important then to link it to policy. I can do the best humanitarian project, the best developmental project, but it's important to show our external factors. I think that's one of the elements that are important for protection. Okay. So we have indicators from one side, and then we have categories on the qualitative side. How do we try to link this with dignity and safety? And here I will try to go very slowly. So on the quantitative side, the indicators are associated to threats, vulnerability, and capacity. The sum of the, no, it's not the sum, it's the algebraic, whatever, median, analytical terminology to calculate, basically gives us a number. Okay, imagine this as numbers. So we have a number telling this is the risk, and these are the number of threats, vulnerability, and capacity. It gives an indication. And we associated them with dignity and safety. On the qualitative side, what we try to, and this is again to learn from the field. When we start applying the first 3 years a protection approach in the field, the most difficult part for us was having our local colleagues understanding the difference of the protection terminology between a threat, between a risk, dignity, and safety. So they were collecting a lot of feedback. But our mistake was to try to have them using tools that had them thinking in the field while they were collecting information, where to put that information. Okay, so what you're telling me is a threat, it's a vulnerability, it's a capacity, and they were doing this by engaging the population. And this was our first mistake. So what we try to do with exercise of creating categories is that we release our local colleagues from thinking in the field, so to collect easily the information, and then categorizing them. I can extend afterwards maybe on how we develop the categories, but this is a long discussion. So we use three different elements, which is meaningful access to services, accountability, and participation and empowerment as indications of dignity. Not measurement of dignity, an indication of dignity. That's for me is important. And on the safety side, we use individual safety in terms of individual households, and environmental safety, not as natural environment, but the environment. So norms, the infrastructure, the natural environment, as environmental safety. This means very simply that in the simplest term, that we connect information, we try to show which indication it is. Okay, what you're telling me goes there. I'll make an example, because this is what we collect in the field. Yeah, we take that road to go to the water source. It takes us 2 hours walking. Sometimes there is the police that is putting a random checkpoint. So what do? We send our kids that goes, check the information, and then call us. And then when we are sure, then the women goes and collect the water and bring it back. But they take 3 hours because the canister is very heavy. This is what we collect. How do we put this information? It's quite... So, and I collected in this way, but then another colleague collected in a different way. So this was an exercise to try to decompose this sentence, this narrative, in different categories. So the example I say, there is an issue of access, there is an issue of participation, and there is an issue of safety, and we just categorize the narrative. This is the same, but just showing you quickly. So from the indicator side, in order to start the exercise, we mainly associate the indicator of threats with the dimension of safety. We mainly associate the indicator of capacity with dignity, just to have an indication. And vulnerabilities, depending on the value, we use it as a measurement of safety or dignity. This gives an indication, And then from the qualitative side, we try to analyze the categories for the qualitative information on the environmental safety to understand better the threats. Accountability and participation are elements that are more informing an idea of dignity, and participation and empowerment and individual safety, the two dimensions of vulnerability. This, I think on this we can work a lot. I mean, what we try to have is to have the quantitative and the qualitative telling us the same thing, okay? Even though the analysis then is still complex, okay? So, before continuing, now I want to show you quickly how the indicators are structured and how the codes are structured very quickly, and then entering a bit in the measuring of dignity and safety. How do we do it, actually? So this is graphically what I've been telling you. So our indicators are associated with the different threats, vulnerability, and capacity index, but also they are associated with different sectors. Okay, so this is to have a protection risk framework that allow us to do a protection risk analysis, but also maintain a linkages with the humanitarian action, I mean the overall comprehensive action. So we can extract analysis that, for example, help us out in having dialogue with clusters. So because when we speak about the overall protection risk, sometimes we can speak with protection clusters sometimes, but we cannot speak, for example, with the WASH, with the shelter, or with other coordination bodies on the developmental side. So the idea is to have also elements that help us out in having a dialogue in terms of analysis. On the dignity and safety, what we try to do, this came from an exercise in the field and associated with a bit of literature study. We disaggregate the categories. Again, participation and empowerment is too broad. Participation and empowerment means anything for everyone. So what we try to understand is what are the categories that might be simpler in understanding from our local colleagues, but can really help us out more or less in categorizing, not indicator I would say, but dimension that we can compare. So for example, on participation and empowerment, we collect information of knowledge and information of the population, community, individual, the level of consultation and participation, the capacity or the level they have on self-reliance, and the possibility of developing their skills. This is an ongoing exercise. So what we are doing, we develop the categories, we are collecting the information, and we are testing them. To show you quickly, let me check. No, this is too much. How do we do it? So, we have the indicators, we have the quantitative indicators that are coming from the different raw data, from a multi-sector need questionnaire. Associated to those indicators, we have what we call topics of inquiry. The topic of inquiry is an indication of dimension that should be investigated with the community. Okay, so from our community, we might have certain indicators that have certain value, and there is a suggestion of topics to be investigated before starting the community engagement. We start the community engagement. The data, as I was telling you, it's collected as narrative as it is. So in the field, it's just collected as narrative. And then when we go back to the office, this narrative is, we have an automatic platform with the indicator linked, and the indicator automatically generate the codes. So we put in the field we do, we just input the narrative that is from booklets directly in our table, and it's associated with an indicator. I will show you an example after. So what we have at the end of our analysis is that every single quantitative indicator, it is linked with a qualitative information, which is text, which is linked with a code. So the indicator tells us, for example, the type of checkpoint, because we have that, is very high. So the severity of that checkpoint or that restriction on that area affects a lot the community. This is associated with a threat. And then after, we have the qualitative information that tells what's happening. So the quantitative table just tells us a number, but the qualitative tells us, yes, because the police that are there are committing, raping, or they are stopping kids, or they ask for bribes, and the qualitative information tells us, try to tell us what is really happening. Our idea for the future, not for now because we don't have the capacity, is that this system of code of the qualitative, we could try to use it for using software of qualitative analysis, like Atlas, and this for me is an extremely important point because in NGOs this normally doesn't happen. So it's where we can try to link the practice and the research. I think that we can learn a lot. Because when we try to learn in the field, we didn't know how many possibilities the qualitative research gives. And the more we are learning, the more we learn how to collect the information in the field. So sometimes this dialogue is extremely important because I could design my system of monitoring of my project in a way that then can be used for further analysis. For example, if you want to do a social network analysis, if I would know what type of information and how you want to be collected, I think I'm already collecting that information sometimes. The only thing is that I can systematize in a way that then I can pass it to a researcher and he can do further analysis. That I think it might be an interesting point to discuss. So, I hope you're still with me. But, I will present you two examples now, just to, because I say a lot of things without showing anything. Indicators. How are our indicators? What we can do with indicators? Because we have indicators of different types. But to try to let you explain how we use a protection risk framework. So for example, here I extracted 3 different indicators. One indicator is type of restricted area, a type of checkpoint, and type of curfew. We cross them, and we might able to, it gives us an indication for the way we design them with the data that we put into it, that try to tell us how much these issues impact the community in terms of population, and also how, not just if they are there, if they are discriminatory towards certain group, if they are not discriminatory, if they are official or unofficial. This is extremely important because all of these columns require different type of actions. So it's not just enough to know that there is a checkpoint or there is a restricted area, but knowing the type of nature, it's important. Another type of exercise, for example, is 2 indicators. One is number of services at walking distance.
Cuidado.
Number of services at walking distance. So wash, shelter, the typical one, the basic one. And then type of risk that they face on movements. The combination of these two indicators really help us in understanding the possibility of risks and what type of risks. Because, for example, I'm inferring here, community that have just 1 or 2 services at community distance, it means that they go, depending on the service, not very often to that service. So even though maybe the risks on the movements are high, or different type of risk, the risk faced by that community is much less, maybe, than the community on the other side, that they have to go, passing the same road 3 or 4 times more often. This is on timing and frequency. And then the type of risk, it tries to give us an indication on what type of action or what type of action is possible, not only for us, but from different actors. Because one important point that I would like to underline is that when we started thinking of this, we had a specific problem that probably many organizations have. We had our humanitarian and development project. They were very sector-based and need-based. Wash, shelter, and whatever. But we were coming through a lot of problems and risks. But since we didn't have any program on that, we stayed there. So when we have meaningful person, I would say, or person that care in managing the project, then they may communicate when the organization doesn't have a referral. But oftentimes what was happening to us, and we didn't know what to do with that. Okay, so that is the nature, to give a background on why we try to start all of this. This is, I use it for questions. I think I finish here. No. How am I in time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
We started a little bit late. So.
Yeah.
We started also late. But we have 1 hour for lunch, but
I need 10 minutes.
No, you
10
can-
minutes, okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, if they're still with me yet. Are you still with me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how can we show this information? Here's some example on what can we show. On the quantitative side, we can show variations in terms of sectors. Okay, so from one, for example, imagine that sometimes happen to us that this is a community where we did just two-time analysis, okay, two analyses. The value of the protection risks didn't change. So it has by saying a number, 80 and 80. But then during that time, we realized that there has been a reduction in education and an increase in civil society presence. So the value tells us that, okay, nothing changed. But then looking this type of visualization, for example, can tell us, no, something changed. And what? And but maybe they balanced or maybe they didn't balance. So this is one type of exercise that we do. And then these sectors are disaggregated by subsectors. So this type of analysis then trickles down to different levels. Then we can associate to the sector analysis a protection risk equation analysis. So of the same area, we can say, okay, that number of protection risk, the sector that seems impacting are those, and what seems having more influence is the capacity of community. In this case, lack of capacity. So for the famous equation, okay? And then the third type of analysis that we can complement with is an analysis of dignity and safety. So here, this is actual data of Lebanon now, of the project we have in Lebanon. So these are all these spots are all cluster of settlement, informal tertiary settlement. Because we cluster them because sometimes they have a population of 3 family, 2 family, 10 families, so we just brought them together. So all these dots are different clusters. So this what tells us, it doesn't tell us more in terms of protection risk, but it gives us an indication where they stand more or less in terms of safety and dignity. Again, an indication. It's not the main picture. I mean, then you have to trickle down and analyze what it is. Two type of use that we are doing with this. We use it to target ECHO and the DEFCO, European Union Development Activities. So whereas we have areas that are more affected by safety, then we try to use it with one type of donors that are more humanitarian oriented. And the other one with donors that are much more developmental oriented, that might be more interested in the resilient aspects. But this is one example. So the combination of the three can have different uses. So we use it for programming, for policy, and so on and so forth. On the qualitative side, all this categorization, then what we can try to do is to transform it as well in numbers, not of as indicators, but number of population communities that seems, according to the qualitative information, to have improved in dignity, in safety, one or the other dimension. So the combination of these, let's say 4 analyses, try to give us a continuous indication of how the system evolves. So just building up a bit on the quantitative and on the qualitative. And this is actually my last slides.
I have one more.
Huh?
You have one more with questions you want to put forward?
Yes, the questions?
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
want to. Yeah.
So our idea was, okay, how can we use our presence in an area to have a system of analysis of environment that can be helpful to all actors that are intervening? And how can we use that presence, not just to do our project, but to maintain a constant process of empowerment. Empowerment in a sense that accompany the community to be right holders. So when we have the response plan, when we have the profiles, and when we have the data, we maintain a discussion of the community. And when possible, and according to a specific process, we have the community engaging duty bearers or actors with their plan and with their information. Okay, that's the overall goal. But we have a lot of challenges that I hope you will bring me more. But specifically, I wanted to finish before starting the question with 2 main challenges. Because we are applying this, for example, now in Lebanon with the Syrian refugees. When there is a community, a population in an area that reside there, straightforward strategy can be thought. But what do we do with the people on the move? What type of strategy? So for example, the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. The type of exercise we do to empowering them to stay, or we empowering them to be able to go back, because in theory is their ultimate goal. And my second question is more on the programmatic side is, okay, we try to combine the analysis, quantitative and qualitative. But then when you come to the decision-making process, that is more at the programming side, what do you use? What do you prime? Okay, the quantitative or the qualitative? Okay, and this is linked with other questions, so I think I will finish there.
Okay.
Yeah.